Good morning, everyone. Happy spring. Happy Easter, happy Passover, and happy Nowruz to everyone celebrating. I hope everybody's having a great spring break. This is attorney Lisa Golshani, and I am here to do my Facebook Live for Mamapedia. And this week we're going to be focusing on tips for nominating legal guardians for your kids. And when we talk about legal guardians, what I'm referring to is the people that would be responsible for caring for your kids and raising them if, God forbid, you were unable to do so yourself. So we're talking about who's going to take care of them physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And this is going to be different than the person who's going to be responsible for their financial affairs. It's a different nomination. So occasionally we may have the same person serving in the capacity of guardian of the person and as guardian of the estate or the money manager, but they don't have to be one and the same person. And a lot of times it makes sense to have different people serving in these capacities because different people have different strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes it makes sense to have some checks and balances involved by having different people serve as guardians of the person and guardians of the estate. And also sometimes when there's a married couple involved, they want both sides of the family involved, so sometimes they assign the financial affairs to the one spouse's side of the family and the responsibility of more of the day-to-day upbringing of the kids to the other side or the other spouse's family, just to make sure that everybody has input and is involved. So this is a really difficult thing to think about. Nobody likes to think about not being there for their kids, myself included. And sometimes it can be a really challenging decision to choose the right person to serve. So today I wanted to give you a couple tips on how to go about thinking about it and getting the process started. It is really essential to legally nominate guardians in a legal writing rather than just a verbal communication, because that wouldn't have any standing in a court of law. And this is especially important if there could be potentially multiple people that could come forward and petition the court for guardianship of your children. So that could result in a really contentious situation, and in a worst case scenario, your kids could end up in foster care until the court could sort out who would be guardian for your kids. So it's very important to nominate them in a legal writing, in a legal format, to ensure that no matter what happens, they're going to be cared for by the right people. I never wish that anybody will have to use this. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but we do know that things can come up. Life can throw us curveballs. So, unexpected illnesses can come up, accidents, natural catastrophes. And by having a legal nomination of guardian in place, you'll just have peace of mind of knowing that the right person would be in charge of caring for your children. And nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be as good as you are, but it's about finding the best possible alternative to yourself. So what I recommend is a 3-step process when you're getting started. So the first step, what I would do is encourage you to make a list of all the people that could potentially serve in the capacity of, not trustee, but guardian for your kids. So this can be your close family members and your extended family members and friends. Basically anybody who's better than foster care. Make a list of all the people that could potentially serve in that capacity. Then next, what I would do is make a list of all of your parenting priorities and values. And these are obviously going to look different for everybody. But I'm going to outline some things that you can think about. So for some people, it's really important that their children be raised in a 2-parent household, that there be a mother figure and a father figure, and the stability of having two parents in the household. So that's something to think about. Whether there's already children in the house, that can be a plus and a minus, and thinking of the ages of the children and how they can relate to your own children and how your children would fit into the dynamic of that family is something else you can think about. Religiosity and religion is another factor you can consider. So if you are a religious Catholic that religiously attends church every week, you may not want to pick your secular friend that doesn't have that same religious background. Not to say that that's necessarily always going to rule that individual out, because sometimes somebody doesn't align perfectly with all of our criteria, but it's something for you to think about. Somebody who shares the same religious values and religious background. Location is also something that's really important for a lot of families that I speak with. It's really important to them that their children maintain as much stability as possible in the event that something happens to them. They don't want their children to be uprooted and have to be moved to a new location. They want their children to remain ideally in the same home, in the same city, in the same school, maintain the same friendships. So thinking about, and that can be really hard, because a lot of us have families that are, in different states, different cities, even different countries. But location is definitely something to think about, because, even the culture can be different in probably Los Angeles versus Louisiana or Germany. So that's one factor. Another factor I place a lot of emphasis on is having a relationship with your children and the level of affection that they have for your children. So that's really important to me, is that my children be in a household where they're very loved and they receive a lot of affection. So you can think about that as well. What else would I suggest? You can think about political values and just general outlook and philosophy of life. So, liberal versus conservative. We've seen that played out dramatically in recent months with the election, and how that's driven a lot of people apart. So by no means would I want that to drive people apart, but that's something that you can think about when you're nominating guardians, is what is their political ideology, what is their philosophy on life, when you're thinking about nominating guardians for your kids. And let's see, disciplinary style is something else you can think about. So for example, I tend to be somewhat lenient in my household, and my kids probably wouldn't do well in a very, very strict household. So that's something to think about, is maybe a similar culture, both from your background. So if you are raised in, if you're a Latino family, and you have that culture, you may want to consider nominating guardians with that same culture. But also the subculture, the familial culture within that family is also something. So I think finding something that's similar to your family culture is definitely a big plus, if that's possible. So once you've made your list of your potential people who can serve and your parenting values, oftentimes you can go ahead and match up those people, and it can become clear as to who is the best potential candidate to serve in that capacity. And one thing I recommend is that you make a decision based on today's facts and circumstances. Nobody knows what things are going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. But so when we do the planning, I always recommend that you look at current circumstances, like the 1 to 3 years ahead of time. And then we revisit these issues, because, like, as I was saying in my previous Facebook Live, was that this is something that you need to periodically review and update. So don't drive yourself too crazy with thinking of potential future scenarios, but given today's facts and circumstances, evaluate what makes the best sense. So, you may have a brother that you love, but that's single, that you think may not be able to handle on his own, but 5 years from now, he could potentially be married and offer a nice home for your children. But as of now, he probably may not be the best, depending on all the other circumstances. So that's something you can revisit and update if circumstances change. But go based on, what is happening today. So one of the other things that I highly recommend is communication. It's really, really important that you communicate these decisions with the people that you're thinking about nominating, and not making these decisions in a vacuum. Because a lot of times people will, for years, will think about these things and they'll never get the insight and the feedback of actually speaking with and talking to the people who they're thinking about nominating. So that will be priceless in helping you make your decision. So just to give you an example, when I was nominating guardians for my firstborn, this is about 9 years ago, I was debating between nominating my mom as first in line as guardian for my son, and my in-laws as first in line. And they both had a very loving, involved relationship with my son. And both would be, capable and willing of doing it if they needed to. But I was leaning towards naming my in-laws as the guardians because they had a long-term stable marriage, whereas my mom was single. And my in-laws would be a two-parent household with a mother figure and a father figure built in. So, but I was really reluctant and worried about nominating my in-laws because I was afraid I would offend and hurt my mother. But when I brought up the issue with my mom reluctantly, she actually surprised me, and she actually agreed with me that she thought that my in-laws would be a better choice. And quite frankly, I think she preferred not to be first in line for that nomination. So that was a big relief to me and helped kind of validate the reasoning behind my decision. And I think that a lot of times you may be surprised by what you have to hear. And if you bring it up to the people you're thinking about, they will really, really help you clarify your decisions. So if you're thinking about nominating somebody, ask them and say, I'm going through this process. I won't hold it against you. I know this is a big commitment or thing to ask of you. And I will not be offended. I just really want to hear your honest feedback on where you are. I mean, I had a friend recently ask me if I would be willing to serve. And I told her that as much as I love her, I would never let her children go to foster care. But I definitely didn't want to be first in line to take care of her kids because I was already feeling so overwhelmed with my own 3 children that I couldn't imagine having to take on 3 more kids. So I told her, put me at the bottom of the list. I'll make sure your kids won't go to foster care, but please don't put me first in line. So, and I was honest in my feedback. So make sure if you ask people, you give them an opportunity to give you the honest feedback and make them feel comfortable enough that they can share that with you. What else was I going to say? I was going to say that a lot of times couples have difficulty making decisions together. And a lot of times what happens, it becomes a fight between my family serving as guardian versus your family serving as guardian. So what I really highly recommend is that you make it about the kids and what's in the best interest of the kids, and take the focus off of my family, your family. Take it off of pointing fingers as to, any shortcomings of that individual as an individual, but rather how that can impact your children. Speak to your spouse from your children's perspective, and that can help a lot. Sometimes help put down the defenses that your spouse may have. And it really, really, really helps to have an independent third party kind of help you mediate and navigate through the process. Because I've had couples that have argued about this for years and couldn't come to a solution. And then they'll come in and meet with me, and within a matter of minutes, oftentimes it does become clear as to who is the best choice, because we've made it more of an objective decision rather than, kind of taking the emotion of my family, your family out, and looking at what's in the best interest of our children. So I highly recommend that if that's something, you take advantage of meeting with me or somebody else that you trust to help mediate you and walk you through that process and come to a resolution. And I do recommend that you put something down in writing, even if, it's not the perfect choice. Any decision you make is better than no decision at all. And sometimes what looks good on paper to an outsider isn't always the best choice. So I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate how important it is to nominate guardians. So I have a girlfriend and she has 2 young children. And if something were to happen to her, there'd be 2 people that would come forward and petition the court for guardianship of her children. So on the one hand, there's her sister-in-law, who is in her mid-30s, has 3 children of her own, long-term stable marriage, has a stable job at the bank, has a large home in the San Fernando Valley. And then on the other hand, there's her sister-in-law, who's in her mid-20s, lives in West Hollywood, is an artistic type who just does freelance work, no stable job. And she's single, no kids of her own, and just starting to get established in her life. So based on those facts and circumstances, if you were the judge, who would you choose? You would choose the sister-in-law, right? She seems like the obvious choice. She's, established and has all the qualifications on paper. And even though my friend loves her sister-in-law, in reality, that's probably the last person she would want to have raising her kids, because they don't share any of the same values. And even though her sister is relatively young and inexperienced and yet to be established in life, she feels that her sister shares her values and would do the closest job to raising her kids the way she would want her children to be raised. So that's why it's really important to avoid any conflict and feuding and uncertainty for your children, to make sure that you make that decision in a legal writing ahead of time. And next week, what I'm going to do on our Facebook Live is go over a lot of the common mistakes I see people make when they nominate guardians. So there's so much I want to share with you, but I have to pace myself. And as always, this is not to be considered legal advice. It's just general information. I invite you to meet with me one-on-one if you'd like. Mention Mamapedia, and I would be happy to offer you a complimentary consultation, and we can discuss your personal situation. Let's see. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Let me see if I have any questions here. Let's see. Thank you, my friends, so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And you can always email me questions, lisa@golshanilaw.com, or you can call my office, 818-334-2805, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions you have. I hope you guys have a wonderful spring break, and I'll see you next week, next Thursday at 10:30 a.m. to go over common mistakes people make when nominating guardians for their children. Ciao!